The issue is this. If we're talking about whether you prefer Mexican food or Chinese food or where you want to live or clothes you want to wear, that's just a preferential issue. Of course, we're pro-choice about all of those kinds of things. But we are not pro-choice when it comes to taking the life of another human being. That's not a legitimate choice, and we should have laws against it. And that's then what I say to people who say, well, I'm pro-choice, but, personally I wouldn't have an abortion. One of the things I ask is, why wouldn't you personally have an abortion? I asked that question of a radio talk show host, a feminist in Los Angeles, and we were on the phone together, and she was saying, well, I don't want to be called pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice. I said, well, why don't you want to be called pro-abortion? What's wrong with abortion? And so she says, well, it's an extremely difficult decision for a woman to make. And I said, really? Well, what makes it difficult? Because getting a tonsillectomy or appendectomy or something like that, it's not that difficult of a thing. What is it? And she's, getting frustrated with me. And then she says, well, because, she's going to kill her baby. And she said the word, baby. And it came out, and she immediately backtracked and rephrased and went another direction. But at that moment, she recognized the reason for which, the only good reason to be personally opposed to abortion in the first place. That this is a human being. This is a baby. And the very reason why we should be opposed to abortion personally, because it's a human being, is exactly why we should be opposed to anyone else taking the life of that human being.
Well, Diane, again, thanks so much for being up here with us. Third time?
Sure. It's been fun.
Thanks again for being with us. And why don't you just begin to walk us through a little bit of your story?
Sure. If you wouldn't mind me just giving a disclaimer first, which I've tried to give this, and I feel like if I just bring it up, then it won't happen. But that theory got blown to smithereens last service. So I figured I'm going to come up here and just announce that I am a crier. And so just bear with me. And last time I may have even gone into the whole ugly cry. It was not pretty. So I'm just letting you know ahead of time. Be a crier with me. I can't think of anything more worthy to be crying about at this point, to be honest with you. So basically, I was 17 years old when I first became pregnant. And the father of the baby was an illegal immigrant farm worker guy that didn't speak English, but I was 17 and I imagined myself in love with him, as only a teenage girl can do. So when my family was planning a move at this point, they were moving out of state. And I thought it would be a really good idea, and I obviously thought this out well in advance. I thought it would be a great idea for me to stay here, drop out of school, and just have a great life with this guy that I couldn't communicate with. I was smart. Yes, I was. So the only downfall of that plan was that I was pregnant. And I really didn't want to be pregnant. I didn't want to be a mom. And to be honest, being a mom never even entered the equation. I didn't want to be pregnant. That was it. And I guess the main motivating factor was I was terrified of labor. I was afraid of pain, and I didn't want to go through that. So I thought, oh no, what do I do? Well, abortion seemed to be like a good answer to me, so I went down to a clinic. And they gave me an ultrasound when I was there. And I have to tell you, I did not know what an ultrasound was. I was 17. I did not know. And now I've had ultrasounds with my children. But at the time when I had that one, they turned the screen away and they turned the sound down. So there was no chance that I would hear or see my baby and know what I was doing. They told me that I was 24 or 26 weeks pregnant. And they said, but we can still help you. You can get out of the situation. It won't be a big deal. And I jumped at that because why wouldn't I? That's what I didn't want to be pregnant and I didn't want to go through pain. So they told me that I would have to go down to the hospital, a local hospital, and have this done. And I said, okay, sign me up. And I was just thinking, I am getting out of this. I showed up at the hospital and there were about a dozen other young women there. And I keep saying as I start into this story and I head back to that hospital, I have these pictures in my head that that are not gone. They're not going to disappear. Like Dan said earlier, it's haunting. It's a haunting decision because you will remember. And I know, too, as I'm sitting up here, I know that you've got pictures in your head, too, because I've talked to a lot of you. And I'm sorry about that. They took us down to the ward, to the basement of the hospital, and there was a large ward there. And they had beds lined along either side, and they had us each get on a cot, and then they injected our abdomens with a saline solution. And then labor began. Remember what I was trying to avoid. And I went through labor for hours with the other girls, and one by one they began losing their babies. And I remember one girl on my side, when she lost her baby, she was asking the nurses and crying, saying, "Is it a boy or is it a girl?" Because you could tell. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to be there. I was one of the last ones, if not the last one, to lose my child. And they cleaned us up and we just stumbled on out the doors. And I determined that I would bury this traumatic incident. I would never, ever think of it again or bring it up again. I obviously broke that. I would never think of it again. And I never, at the whole time, I never gave a thought to my child. I just wanted to get on with my life and forget that. So I did. And a few months went by, and some friends, the Sunquists from this church, introduced me. They knew I was on the brink of homelessness, living in this cabin with these guys, just a terrible situation. And so they introduced me to the pastor of their church, and I keep going like this because it was Randy Alcorn. And so I went in, and he talked with me for a while, and I remember you saying that you wanted to know, you said, "What are your plans?" And I can see your face just going like this. And you said, "What are your plans for your life?" I had no clue. I had no clue. So what a lot of people might do in that situation, and I'm one of those people, they might find an agency. They might call somebody else that might be able to help. They might get you involved in a program of some sort. Or if they were really on the ball, they might disciple you or mentor you and meet you once a week and talk with you about your issues. But Randy and Nancy did not do that because they saw a need and they acted on it. And they called me up after they prayed about it and they said, "Diane, we've prayed about this and we wondered if you would like to come and live with us." And I said, "Sure." I had nothing better going on. And I didn't. So I moved in with Randy and Nancy, and these people provided food and shelter, sustenance for me. They introduced me to you guys, to my church family, and I'm still here, for goodness sake. They introduced me to Jesus, and I got to see him firsthand. It was a wonderful thing. But when I moved into their house, I was already pregnant again. I hadn't told them because I hadn't learned anything. So I kept it quiet and just wore baggy clothes until they finally figured out, "Hey, I think she's pregnant." And I said, "Oh, yes, I am." And I am so grateful. I'm eternally grateful. And that's why I will always get choked up talking about that, because they helped guide me in my decision to give that baby up for adoption to a family that couldn't have children. And so I don't have the feelings of regret and the horrible pictures in my head and on that I have with an abortion. I have almost a sense of pride that I was able to help somebody out. And I can always have hope, and I can pray for him and maybe meet him someday. Or anyway, I could go off on that, but I won't. So anyway, I guess what I'd want to say about that is that while I was still sinning, while I was still this person making terrible decisions, in fact, before that, God still protected me, and God still loved me, and he was there. I just didn't always